Michael Hastings sat in his sleek, modern apartment in the heart of New York City, staring at the invitation in his hand. It was an elegant, ivory-colored card embossed with gold lettering, a perfect reflection of the sender's refined taste. It was an invitation to the wedding of his ex-girlfriend, Isabel Grayson, and her fiancé, Ethan Foster. The news of her engagement had reached him months ago, but seeing the official invitation now made the reality settle in with a heavy thud. Michael had always imagined he'd be the one walking down the aisle with Isabel, but things had taken a different turn. A year ago, she had left him, tired of competing with his career. He was a corporate lawyer at one of the most prestigious firms in Manhattan, where cases and clients seemed to consume his every waking hour. Isabel had grown weary of his absence, of the many dinners where his chair sat empty, and of weekends spent alone while he worked late nights. He hadn't blamed her. At the time, his ambition had been everything to him. The idea of slowing down for a relationship seemed ludicrous, but now, as he sat with the weight of the wedding invitation in his hands, he wondered if he had made a mistake. The thought of attending her wedding, surrounded by familiar faces whispering about how he had failed to keep her, was unbearable. The elegant script on the card blurred as his mind wandered. He couldn't possibly go to the wedding alone. The idea of showing up solo, like a ghost of the past, made him uneasy. He needed a distraction. Something, or someone, unexpected. Later that day, as Michael walked through the crowded streets of the city, the thoughts of Isabel and her upcoming wedding still weighed heavily on his mind. New York was alive with the usual hustle and bustle, taxi horns blaring, people rushing to and from appointments, and the occasional street performer trying to make a living. Michael turned down a quieter street, needing a break from the chaos. As he walked past a small park, he noticed a woman sitting on the corner. Her clothes were worn, and her hair was untidy, but what struck him most was the serene smile on her face. She sat quietly, with an air of calm that was out of place in the frantic city around her. Her hands rested in her lap, holding a cardboard sign that read, "Anything helps. God bless." Michael paused, studying her for a moment. There was something about her, something dignified, despite her disheveled appearance. He wasn't sure what possessed him to approach her, but before he knew it, he was standing in front of her. "Hi," he said awkwardly, clearing his throat. "I'm Michael." The woman looked up, surprised to see someone speaking to her. She offered a small smile, cautious but genuine. "Hello," she replied, her voice soft. "I'm Rachel." For a moment there was an uncomfortable silence as they sized each other up. Michael wasn't sure why he had stopped. Was it pity? Curiosity? But as he looked into Rachel's eyes, he saw something deeper, something that intrigued him. "You come here often?" he asked, immediately cringing at the absurdity of his question. She chuckled, and he was relieved to see her smile again. "Not by choice," Rachel replied, her tone light but tinged with a hint of sadness. "But this spot gets a decent amount of foot traffic, so here I am." Michael nodded, feeling foolish for his earlier question. He couldn't place why he felt the need to continue the conversation, but there was something about Rachel's presence that calmed him. Maybe it was her resilience, or maybe it was the fact that she wasn't judging him, wasn't expecting anything from him. They talked for a while longer, about the city, about life, about small things that helped Michael forget, if only for a moment, the anxiety that had been building since he received that invitation. As their conversation started to wind down, Michael found himself saying something he hadn't planned at all. "Would you like to come to a wedding with me?" Rachel blinked, her surprise evident. "A wedding?" she asked, clearly unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Yeah," Michael said, feeling the absurdity of his own words but pressing on. "My ex-girlfriend is getting married and I could really use the company." Rachel studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Michael could see her hesitation. After all, what kind of person invites a stranger off the street to a wedding? "I don't have anything to wear," Rachel finally said, as if that were the only thing holding her back. Michael smiled, his mind already racing with a plan. "I'll take care of that. We'll get you something nice, and I promise, it'll be a day you'll never forget." Rachel's eyes flickered with something. Hope, perhaps. Or maybe disbelief. Finally, she nodded. "All right," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "I'll go with you." 2 days later, Michael found himself standing with Rachel in front of one of the most exclusive boutiques in the city. The kind of place where the windows gleamed with high-end designer dresses and the price tags were hidden, as if the very thought of inquiring about the cost was vulgar. Rachel stood beside him, looking up at the store with wide eyes. She hesitated at the door, her worn shoes scuffing against the pristine pavement. "Are you sure about this?" she asked quietly, her voice filled with uncertainty. Michael gave her a reassuring smile. "Trust me," he said. "You deserve to feel special for once." They walked into the boutique, and immediately the atmosphere shifted. The staff glanced at Rachel, their eyes lingering a little too long on her ragged clothing, her messy hair. Michael noticed the subtle looks exchanged between them, the way they assessed her as if she didn't belong. It angered him, but he kept his expression neutral. "We're looking for a dress," Michael said, his tone firm. "Something special." One of the saleswomen stepped forward, a polite but thin smile on her face. "Of course," she said, her eyes still flicking toward Rachel. "Right this way." What followed was a whirlwind of activity. Dresses were brought out, each one more stunning than the last. At first, Rachel seemed overwhelmed, unsure of how to respond to the extravagance being offered to her. But as the staff began to treat her with the same care they would any wealthy client, she began to relax. When Rachel finally stepped out of the dressing room in a floor-length, deep sapphire gown, Michael's breath caught in his throat. She looked regal. The dress fit her perfectly, accentuating her figure without being overly flashy. Her hair had been styled, and her face was glowing, a light dusting of makeup enhancing her natural beauty. She stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection as if she couldn't quite believe the woman staring back at her. I don't recognize myself," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Michael stepped beside her, meeting her gaze in the mirror. "You look incredible," he said softly. "But more than that, you deserve to feel like this. Every day." Rachel turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you, Michael. I don't think I've ever felt this important." Michael smiled at her, genuinely happy to see the transformation, not just in her appearance, but in the way she carried herself now, with confidence and grace. He knew then that bringing her to the wedding wasn't just about making a statement. It was about giving someone a chance to feel special, to reclaim something that life had taken from them. The day of the wedding arrived, and Michael found himself surprisingly nervous. He hadn't anticipated just how much attention he and Rachel would attract. The wedding was being held at a lavish venue just outside the city, a sprawling estate with manicured gardens, marble fountains, and towering chandeliers inside. As they arrived, Michael could feel the weight of eyes on them. Rachel, however, seemed to carry herself with a quiet dignity that impressed him. She walked beside him, her head held high, the sapphire gown flowing around her like liquid midnight. She was a far cry from the woman he had met on the street corner only days ago. When they stepped into the reception hall, the buzz of conversation slowed to a murmur. Guests turned to look, their curiosity palpable. Michael could hear the faint whispers. Asterisk. Who is she? Asterisk. Is that Michael Hastings with her? He scanned the room, spotting Isabel at the far end. She was greeting guests, her new husband Ethan by her side. When her gaze landed on Michael and Rachel, her smile faltered ever so slightly. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. As they made their way through the crowd, Michael introduced Rachel to several guests. Each time there was a polite smile, a handshake, but also the unmistakable undercurrent of curiosity. Rachel handled it all with grace, smiling warmly and speaking softly but confidently. It was as if she had always belonged in this world, even though she clearly didn't. Finally, Isabel approached them, her expression carefully composed. "Michael," she said, her voice polite, but strained. "It's good to see you." "You too, Isabel," Michael replied, keeping his tone light. "And you must be..." Isabel's eyes flicked to Rachel, the question hanging in the air. "This is Rachel," Michael said, his voice warm. "She's my date for the evening." Isabel's smile was tight, her discomfort evident. "Rachel," she said, her voice measured. "It's a pleasure to meet you. You look lovely." "Thank you," Rachel replied, her tone calm but assertive. "You have a beautiful wedding." The tension between the three of them was thick, though no one else seemed to notice. Isabel's eyes lingered on Rachel for a moment longer, as if trying to figure out who she really was and what she was doing there. But then, with a strained smile, she excused herself, returning to her guests. Michael let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Rachel glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. "That was... intense." Michael chuckled, shaking his head. "You handled it perfectly." As the evening progressed, the orchestra began to play a slow, romantic tune. Michael turned to Rachel, a mischievous smile on his face. "May I have this dance?" Rachel hesitated, glancing around at the guests who were now watching them with even more interest. But the warmth in Michael's eyes gave her the courage to nod. "Yes," she said softly. "I'd love to." Michael led her to the dance floor, and as they began to sway to the music, everything else seemed to fade away. The crowd, the whispers, the judgmental eyes, it all melted into the background as they moved together. For Michael, the dance was more than just a simple waltz. It was a moment of clarity. As he held Rachel in his arms, he realized that what had started as an impulsive decision had turned into something far more meaningful. Rachel wasn't just a date to make his ex jealous. She was someone he had come to care for, someone who had faced life's challenges with grace and strength, and someone who had shown him a different perspective on life. As the song ended, Michael looked down into Rachel's eyes, and he knew then that the night, and their journey together, was far from over. Later in the evening, Michael stepped outside for some fresh air. The garden behind the reception hall was quiet, a brief respite from the crowded ballroom. He leaned against a stone railing, gazing out at the distant city lights. A moment later, Isabel appeared at his side, her expression conflicted. "Michael?" she began, her voice hesitant. "Can we talk?" "Of course," he replied, though he could sense where the conversation was headed. Isabel took a deep breath, her hands wringing nervously. "Seeing you tonight, with her, it made me realize something. I think I made a mistake when I ended things with you. I thought you were too focused on work, that you didn't have time for me. But seeing you tonight, you've changed. I regret letting you go." Michael listened quietly, his emotions surprisingly calm. A year ago, hearing Isabel say these words would have filled him with hope, maybe even a desire to rekindle what they had. But now, as he stood there, he realized that something had shifted within him. The love he once felt for Isabel had softened, transformed into something lighter, easier to let go of. "Isabel," he said gently, "I appreciate your honesty, but I've moved on. What we had was real, but it's in the past now. I've found peace with that." Isabel's eyes filled with a mix of sadness and understanding. She hadn't expected him to be so clear, so resolute. "I see," she murmured. "I'm sorry for how things ended, Michael. I wish you all the best." "Thank you," Michael replied with a small, genuine smile. "I wish you happiness too." As Isabel walked away, Michael felt a sense of liberation. He had finally closed the chapter on that part of his life, and it felt good. The weight that had been pressing on his chest for so long had lifted, leaving him feeling light and free. Rachel had been standing near the edge of the garden, just out of sight, when she overheard Michael's conversation with Isabel. Her heart pounded as she listened, a mixture of relief and doubt swirling within her. Was she just a tool for Michael to move on from his past? or was there something real between them? Needing a moment to gather her thoughts, Rachel slipped away to a secluded bench. She sat down, the cool night air soothing her frazzled nerves. She had grown fond of Michael in the short time they had known each other, but she couldn't shake the nagging fear that she was just a temporary fix for his broken heart. Before she could lose herself in doubt, Michael appeared, finding her alone in the garden. His expression softened when he saw the concern in her eyes. "Rachel," he said gently, sitting down beside her. "I need to ask you something. Have I made you feel like you were just a pawn in all of this? Because if I have, I'm so sorry. That was never my intention." Rachel met his gaze, searching for any sign of insincerity. "Was I just a way to make Isabel jealous?" she asked quietly. Michael shook his head, his voice filled with conviction. "No, Rachel. Isabel is my past, and I've made peace with that tonight. You've shown me something I didn't know I was missing. Your strength, your kindness, the way you've handled everything tonight. I'm not thinking about Isabel anymore. I'm thinking about you and how much I want to know you better." Rachel felt a wave of relief wash over her, his sincerity reaching deep into her heart. For the first time that evening, she allowed herself to believe that this could be real, that she could be more than just a momentary distraction for him. "Thank you for being honest with me," she said softly. "I care about you too, Michael. But I needed to know that this wasn't just a one-time thing." Michael smiled, reaching out to gently take her hand. "It's not, Rachel. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to spend more time with you. I want to see where this can go." The bond between them deepened in that moment, as they both realized that what they had was more than just a reaction to the past. It was the beginning of something new, something meaningful. As they looked back toward the wedding reception, where guests continued to chatter and dance, Michael felt a sudden urge to leave the superficiality behind. "Why don't we get out of here?" he suggested with a smile. "Let's spend the rest of the evening somewhere else, just the two of us." Rachel smiled back, feeling a warmth in her heart that she hadn't felt in a long time. "I'd like that," she replied. Together, they quietly slipped away from the wedding, leaving behind the judgmental eyes and whispered gossip. They stepped into the cool night, ready to explore whatever the future might hold, on their own terms. Michael and Rachel walked hand in hand through the quiet streets of the city. The noise and chatter of the wedding reception slowly faded into the background, replaced by the soft hum of the city at night. Above them, the stars seemed to shine just a little brighter, as if illuminating the path ahead. For the first time in a long while, Michael felt a sense of peace and optimism about the future. The weight of his past was gone, and in its place was the promise of something new, something real. He turned to Rachel, his eyes reflecting a new resolve. "Rachel," he said quietly, "I don't want tonight to be a one-time thing. I want to help you, support you, and see where this goes. You have so much potential, and I want to be there for you as you pursue your dreams." Rachel looked up at him, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and excitement. "Thank you, Michael. You don't know what this means to me. For the first time in years, I feel like I have a chance, a real chance to turn my life around, and to do it with someone who believes in me. That's more than I ever hoped for." As they continued to walk, they began to talk about Rachel's aspirations, dreams that had been buried under the weight of her struggles. Michael listened intently, offering encouragement and ideas on how they could work together to make those dreams a reality. Back at the wedding, Isabel watched them from a distance. The sight of Michael and Rachel disappearing into the night filled her with a profound sense of loss. She had thought she would always have the upper hand, that Michael's feelings for her would never fully fade. But seeing him now, truly happy with someone else, she realized how wrong she had been. She had let go of something genuine, something meaningful, a love she had taken for granted. And now, watching Michael walk away with Rachel, Isabel felt the weight of her own choices settling in. As Michael and Rachel reached the end of the path leading away from the wedding venue, they paused for a moment, looking out at the city lights in the distance. There was a sense of finality in the air, not of an ending, but of a new beginning. "This feels like the start of something good," Rachel said softly, squeezing Michael's hand. "It does," Michael agreed, smiling at her. "And I can't wait to see where it takes us." Together they walked into the night, ready to face whatever challenges and opportunities the future might bring. Their past no longer defined them. Instead, they were united by a shared hope and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. The journey ahead was filled with love, growth, and endless possibilities, and they were both eager to embrace it together.